a new data type in Python that's going to be very useful down the road, and that is a dictionary. So we have what we had before, and now I'm going to talk about dictionaries. So dictionaries are list associations. So you can associate some object, say a string, a name, with some other object, say an integer, the age of that person. So you can associate John to the number 32. You can associate Mary to the number 25. You can associate, for example, the string bananas, you can associate the string bananas with the number 3.99, which might be the cost. You can associate milk to $7.99 and oranges to $2.99, for example. And you can have these associations made there. In the previous video, we talked about having perhaps multiple lists, one with prices, one with groceries, right? Or one with, it could be names and phone numbers. But in order to retrieve that data, we needed to know, for example, if I wanted the prices, if I wanted to know the prices of bananas, I needed to know where in the list is the item banana, and then look in the price list for that same, the corresponding number. What happens when you have thousands of data sets and you add and remove data all the time? Well, what happens is that it's no longer easy to know what position is the name and what position is the phone number, and so on and so forth. Dictionaries maintain that association no matter how many data points you have. So let me explain. In a dictionary, we're going to have what's called keys and what's called values. Keys is the string, the name that you want to associate with a given value. So for example, I can create a little dictionary with the price of bananas, milk, and oranges, for example, and I'm going to call the dictionary groceries. So the first thing I'm going to do here is my variable groceries, right? The type of this variable is not an integer, it's not a list, it's not a string, it's a dictionary. And how do I know it's a dictionary? Because it has opening and closing of curly braces. Inside these curly braces, I'm going to put my key and value pairs separated by a colon. So my keys in this example, they're going to be strings. So I'm going to associate grocery item names. So for example, bananas. And I'm going to associate that to the value 3.99. Then with a comma, just like in the list, I separate the next item. So I'm going to associate milk with the value 7.99. And I'm going to associate oranges with the value 2.99. Okay? And that might be my dictionary. Now, I can print the dictionary just so we know what we have. And this dictionary, remember, the name of it was groceries. And let's see what happens. So we execute this bit of code, and we see that it printed bananas, milk, and oranges in that sort of fashion. Now, I don't care that milk is in the second position and bananas in the first and oranges in the third. I can just get their associated value by looking for the key. For example, I can say print groceries, and then instead of giving it an index, I'll give it a name of an item. So oranges. Now I'm going to print the value associated to oranges in groceries. So if I run this bit of code, I get 2.99, and we can see here oranges is associated to the value 2.99. I can also change some of the values here. So for example, I want to, let's say the milk got reduced, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say groceries, milk. This is the value associated to milk. The value associated to the key milk is now going to be 5.99, for example. And just so you know that it changed, I can print the dictionary. And let's do this. So I can see here that I have bananas, milk, and oranges, but look at milk. Milk is now $5.99. It was $7.99 before. So I can change values in the dictionary. I can also add items to a dictionary. For example, now I'm going to sell or buy or whatever cookies, okay? And those are going to be $2.99. And what happens now if I print groceries? Well, I'm going to execute this. I'm going to see that now I added a new item here, cookies. And the beautiful thing about dictionaries is I can keep adding data, and I don't care what position in the list this data is, because I do not need its position to look up the name and the value associated to it. I just need to know the name or whatever the key is. We call it key, but it's the name that's associated to this value, right? Now, I can do so much more. So in this case, I'm going to look at my groceries here, my dictionary here. In this case, I had a string for a key and an integer for a value, okay? I can have for a value, I can have other stuff. I can have a list. I can have any data type for a value. I can even have multiple dictionaries, but that's for a different video, okay? So the values associated to keys can be of any data type. So for example, right now I'm going to create a list, and I'm going to create a list called grades. These are going to be my grades in school. With that line, I've just created an empty list. Now, I'm going to start looking at different grades. For example, for English, okay, I'm going to do, I don't know, 3.8, 4.0, 2.1, and say 3.7. Those are my grades in English. Now, I'm going to associate grades for math. And my grades in math are going to be a 4.0. This might be the test that I have, or the homeworks, or whatever. 3.0, 2.0, 4.0, 3.7, I don't know, 3.8, and 3.9. And I don't need to have the same amount of grades, because maybe in math I had more grades than in English, for example. And I can look at my grades in science, just for the sake of adding more grades here. And this can be, in science I had a lot less projects because they were longer, for example. So I only had 3 grades in science, right? Now I can print these grades, and you will see that they've all been saved. So let's print them. Here, English is this, math is this number of grades, and science is these grades. So you can see that in a dictionary, I can associate lists to keys, in this case to strings. Now, why would I want to do this? Well, because let's say I want to get the average of my grades in math, for example, okay? Well, it's easy. So for my grade in math, what I can do is, I know that the average is the sum of the grades divided by the number of items in that grade. The sum of the list of numbers divided by how many numbers are in that list. So I can look at my final in math, and that can be the sum of my grades in math. What are my grades in math? Well, it's the value associated to grades.math, right? That's the sum of my grades in math. And how many grades are there in math? Well, that's the length of my grades in math, of the associated item to grades math, right? Remember, when the computer sees this, it actually substitutes that with the actual list of things. So I can have, that might be my average, and then I'm going to print it. Print final math, for example. Okay? And I'm going to run this, and there it is. Whoops. There it is. 3.485, whatever. That's my average, right? So now I can do stuff that's much more interesting than just retrieve a prize, right? I can work on this list. I can also simulate these to have, say, the same number of grades, and I can do the average of each one of them, put them in a list, and do the average of all my grades, for example, my overall GPA, whatever I want. Dictionaries give you so much more than this, but this is a very good and basic introduction to get your feet wet on dictionaries. I hope you liked it, and we'll see you in the next video.